Hi, and welcome to Loving the Planets for the week of April 17th, 2017. I'm Armand Diaz in New York.
And I'm Margaret Gray in Ireland.
Margaret, everything changes this week. We have three sign changes. We have the sun going into Taurus, we have Mercury retrograding back into Aries, and we have Mars moving forward into Gemini. What is your sense of this week?
Well, I think it's another really dynamic, busy week. And I think we've had quite a few of these weeks. So I think we're kind of really constantly on the move, and there's a lot of chopping and changing. And I think in terms of relationships, these planetary changes are really important in terms of relationships. So because I think, of course, when the sun changes sign, Taurus is very much, of course, a very sensual sign. It's very related to relationships. So I think it's a very important shift from the kind of me energy of Aries into the Taurus energy. And I think it's also very important, Mars, of course, changing into another sign, into Gemini, because Mars, of course, about desire and sexuality and attraction and chemistry. So I think it's a very important week for relationships, all in all.
I agree. I think, well, Mercury retrograding back into Aries. We've had Mercury in Aries for quite some time. He just took a little step into Taurus and then backed out again. Excuse me. But my sense of Mercury in Aries retrograde for this week certainly is one where, he's going backwards in a sign that intends to go forward and intends to go rather quickly. And here he's sort of backing up into it. It's sort of like running the wrong way in a race or something along those lines. I think communication can be like quite impulsive, and I think that some of the mercurial mishaps are going to be quite prominent. So you got to be really careful in communication this week.
Yes, I agree. I think whenever there's so many dynamic energies around, it all depends where they land on people's charts. So I think for anybody in particular who has, a natal Mercury in Aries or in a fire sign, or has sun or moon in Aries or ascendant in Aries, certainly Mercury going back into Aries is going to impact much more. And as you say, its natural inclination is to go forward, but it's kind of got, the brakes on. So it can cause a little bit of confusion. So maybe to clarify things, a lot before communicating. So, what are your thoughts about Mars in Gemini, Armand?
Well, first of all, when it comes to doing some fighting, we're going to do it verbally. This is the inclination of Mars in Gemini, is to talk it out, or perhaps not talk it out. It's often, perhaps, despite the twin nature of Gemini, it's often sometimes a monologue, from me to you type of thing with Mars and Gemini. It's Mars after all. So sometimes a real tirade of words can come flying out when you get a little bit upset. And again, with Mercury retrograde, they may be the wrong words, but spoken quickly. Mars and Gemini work quickly. In terms of sexuality, I think Mars and Gemini has a very flexible, experimental, but also sometimes a little bit verbal approach. Sometimes, Mars and Gemini would rather think about the possibilities rather than actually act on them, which is depending upon where you are in relationship, is a good thing or a bit of a challenge. With Venus now moving direct, I think a lot of people would take that as being something along the lines of sort of a green light in terms of maybe getting a relationship going and sort of starting to get involved sexually or something like that.
So how might, with Mars in Gemini, how might that be a good way to approach that, with Venus direct? Say somebody did want to go forward in a relationship. How would that work well, do you think, with Mars and Gemini?
Well, again, it seems a matter of communication, but on the other hand, with Mercury retrograde, it could be a little difficult to be communicating. So I would think it would be great to remember to do a little bit of listening in the process. Maybe toss the idea out there and see what happens, but not necessarily, make your 15 great points on the matter or explain why it has to be this way or why it's an obvious choice or something like that.
And also, of course, we've got Venus and Saturn square coming up again. So towards the end of the week. So the end of the week gets particularly busy because that's when Mars goes into Pisces, but also Venus and Saturn square again. Now, we already had these two planets squaring each other, of course, on the 9th of April, the week of the 9th of April. So we've kind of been in this energy already. And the very last one is going to be in October. So this is the third of four of them. So that in itself kind of can really delay or hamper relationships in some ways. Although it could also, some people might argue it might help to materialize things. What's your viewpoint on the Venus-Saturn square?
Well, Venus has aspected Saturn 3 times, before her retrograde, during her retrograde, and now quickly afterwards, after her retrograde. So I think that this is liable to be a point of materialization or manifestation. It certainly looks like an actual decision point. And so relationship issues that have been sort of sitting out there since Venus really, entered the shadow of her retrograde in January, or in late January, are likely to sort of come to a kind of decision point now. Remember that Venus squares Saturn this week, a day after Pluto station, which, we're talking about getting down to the bones over here and really getting to the core of the matter, or manifesting power and control issues in relationship, and then so that Venus Saturn square can have an effect, in that sense as well. So I think that it's liable to be a time of decisions and deadlines and deciding about moving forward or stepping back, and just be sure that you're sure. But I think the Venus retrograde was about making you sure.
That's a very good point, because with Venus, with Pluto stationing ready to go retrograde again, we've really had so many of these retrogrades, and we're still in those retrogrades. So it all feels like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so I think your suggestion, kind of really making sure before we do things, is a really good one, because otherwise it could get really quite confusing, and then there may be regrets later.
I think so. Pluto stations often give us the sense, and if there's tensions, Pluto stations often give us the sense of, well, if I can, I'm going to do something. I'm going to assert some power. I'm going to demonstrate that I can do something, and not necessarily to the other person, but just for ourselves. And, you don't want to act just to show that you can act. You don't want to do something just to show, and you certainly don't like, with a Venus Saturn square, you don't want to just sort of cut off someone just to show that you can do something, that you're not going to be pushed around, type of thing. I mean, on the other hand, if you've been thinking, wow, this is a situation I'd like to get out of, I'd like to move on, this is the perfect opportunity.
Yes, and also, I think the reinforcement of that, being careful not to do things just because, with the Sun in Taurus, because Sun in Taurus can sometimes kind of almost dig itself a hole in terms of like, I'm just going to do this, and it can get a little bit stubborn. So with that energy in the sky as well, just to be careful not to put ourselves into a corner really that we can't get out of.
Yeah. We could certainly do that. And again, Mercury retrograde, miscommunications. Mars at the end of Taurus too. So Mars is going to go into Gemini, but Mars is going to spend a good part of the week at the end of Taurus, where it can be, quite determined, not to say stubborn, but it can be quite determined. And that can certainly play into it right around Thursday's Pluto station.
So some of the things to maybe do this week that might be good, maybe finish things off, projects, or maybe, in relationships, really kind of maybe give some thought to, what the future is of a relationship, or think about, what has come to fruition of the Venus retrograde. That might be a good thing to do. What do you think is the best day to kind of maybe have some fun or do something enjoyable this week, Armand?
Well, let's see. We start off with the moon in Capricorn. Through the moon in Aquarius, we have the Pluto station. And then my guess would be, despite the Pluto station. Oh, well, try your best. try your best for Saturday night. There's some heavy energies building during the course of the week. Early in the week, the Capricorn moon, I mean, you might have some fun with that. But I would say that probably Saturday night with the moon in Pisces, I really don't feel there's like a lighthearted feel to things this week, but either earlier in the week or at the weekend, not so much from midweek to the beginning of the weekend.
So maybe keep that candlelit dinner to Saturday night then.
Yeah, if you're still together. Don't make reservations on Tuesday,
But no rash decisions either. No rash decisions. So we'll see everybody again next week for Love and the Planets. Thank you.